Okay. Hello. Welcome to episode 2 of our Women's History Trivia First and some Musings. And it continues to be March, but even after March, we will continue uh, throughout past that. So last time we left off in the middle of the 1600s, and this time we're going to pick up in 1660. And this is a very significant time in our history. And because if you recall, the reason that the British men said they came, left England and came here was for religious freedom. They did not want their religion dictated to them, and they wanted to create a government, a country, a place where everyone had the freedom to practice whatever religion they wanted to. Okay, so in 1660, it's interesting to note that a woman named Mary Dyer, Dyer, was hanged in Boston for practicing the Quaker religion in colonial Puritan America. And she was not alone. There were the men in power who were making the laws and enforcing them insisted on the Puritan religion. So they actually went and completely again, they did exactly what was going on in England and that caused them to leave and flee the country. And if anyone practiced any other religion except the one they wanted, they literally killed them. They were sentenced to death. We could think of these people as just, a long time ago, but this was a real person in real life who was someone's daughter, wife, mother, and she was hanged. And like I said, she's not the only one. And it's a very interesting and telling time that shaped this country. I'm going to read a passage from this part. She, meaning Mary Dyer, was just one of 4 now known in 1660 as the Boston Martyrs. The court documents exchanged between then Governor Endicott and Mary Dyer was printed in the paper when she was originally arrested, of course, prior to her hanging. And Governor Endicott in the court, speaking to Mary Dyer, who has been arrested for practicing Quaker religion instead of Puritan. And he asked her, they actually had the transcript in the newspaper at the time. And he says, "Are you the same Mary Dyer that was arrested before?" Dyer: "I am the same Mary Dyer that was here in the last general court." Endicott: "You will own yourself a Quaker, will you not?" Dyer: "I own myself to be reproachfully so called." Endicott: "Sentence was passed upon you the last general court, and now likewise. You must return to the prison and there remain until tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Then you must go to the gallows and there be hanged until you are dead." Dyer responded, "There is no more than what thou saidst before." Endicott: "But now it is to be executed. Therefore, prepare yourself tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Dyer responded to the governor or judge, as he was being the judge at the time. "I came in obedience to the will of God, the last general court, desiring you to repeal your unrighteous laws of banishment on pain of death, and that same is my work now." an earnest request, although I told you that if you refuse to repeal them, the Lord would send others of his servants to witness against them. Whatever that all means, but that's the way they talk back then. So, but you get the gist of it. And she was very brave and just refused to let them tell her what to do on something like this. I mean, she wasn't stealing from anyone or causing harm to anyone. You know, she was practicing a religion that they apparently did not approve of. And you know, I don't practice a religion, but I respect those who do. It gives them comfort. It's their way of life. As long as they're not breaking any law, they're not harming anyone. I believe in the whole premise of why they came here, fled England, and started the country. I don't like the way they did it, considering the Native Americans in that situation. But what they wanted was good. And then they just threw it all away and set this precedence up that we still are having an issue with and confrontations with today, with freedom of religion and religion. Anywho, it is assumed, and this is something I wrote just through my research on this, on her life and death. It is assumed Mary Dyer was about 49 years old at the time she was hanged. So much for religious freedoms in the New World. There's a statue of Mary Dyer, by the way, that was erected way back in 1959 that honors her, and it's outside the Massachusetts State House in Boston. And it was the statue was also sculpted by a woman, and her name is Sylvia Shaw Judson. So if you're ever in the area and you haven't checked that out, I encourage you to do so. And this isn't about believing in religion or her religion or anything like that. This is about honoring a woman who was brave and stood fast without violence. She didn't start a riot or anything. She was just simply not going to change when she knew that the Constitution and everything was all about, the whole Constitution we haven't had that yet, but she knows that that's the reason, because there were some there was government in place at the time, and it was called Puritan America, and she knew they were going against the whole premise of the original people who came over on the Mayflower. So anyway, in 1661, which was a year later, the King of England sent a letter to the governors over here in the New World, directing them to cease all executions and imprisonments of Quakers. Subsequently, funny that the king, after they fled, the king is going to save everyone. Subsequently, the Puritans passed a new law called the Cart and Tail Law. This was horrible. Wherein they would tie suspected Quakers to carts. They really did this, to carts, strip them to the waist, and drag them through town behind the cart. The people that settled here so they would not be persecuted for their religion are now persecuting others for their religion. Quaker persecution finally stopped about 10 years later in the 1670s, when public sentiment had finally begun to change. But for an entire decade, people were tortured, and just because of their religion. Um, okay, so remember the statue of Mary Dyer that was sculpted by Sylvia Judson. Now, Sylvia Judson was born in 1897 and she passed away in 1978. And like I said, that statue in Boston of Mary went up in 1959 is when she was commissioned to do that. Another statue that she did, a famous statue that almost everyone is aware of, even if you've seen it in a picture, even if you haven't seen it in real life, she sculpted the Bird Girl statue. And that is in the movie Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil that was filmed in Savannah, Georgia. Remember the statue in that? She sculpted that, and it was erected in 1936. So it predates even the Mary Dyer statue. And interesting that so many years later that would become famous. Let's see. An original bronze, just a little trivia. An original bronze copy of Bird Girl recently sold. This was a few years ago, but like in 2021, I think, at auction for more than $390,000. And Sylvia Judson really was a very successful sculptor, and especially during her time, the time frame that she was working, most sculptors were male, or most sculptors who were commissioned to do a statue were male. And so I just really love reading about her and finding all of her statues. Now, some of the other statues that she's done, one is called Naughty Fawn, and it's in the Chicago Botanic Gardens. And she was commissioned to do that in 1923. She's got another statue called Merchild, and it's also in the Chicago Botanical Gardens. And she did that in 1925. Little Gardener statue. Wait a minute, where'd it go? Little Gardener at the Jacqueline Kennedy Garden at the White House. She was commissioned to do that in 1929. I don't know if that statue is still there, but it was when Jackie lived at the White House. She did one for Brook Green Gardens in South Carolina called Girl with a Squirrel in 1932. And in Dayton, Ohio, Young Woman Dayton is the name of the statue, and it is housed at the Art Institute of Dayton. So if you ever have a chance to go in there, she did that back in 1934. And you can go online and look up, see what these statues look like. But it's so fun. Take a day trip, go to some places that are near you, and see them. Bird Girl, located at the Telfair Museum of Art in Savannah, Georgia, and at the Ryerson Conservation Area in Riverwoods, Illinois. So Bird Girl is actually in several locations. Girl with Piglet, I've seen that. That's a cute little statue, is at the Brookfield Children's Zoo in Illinois. She did that in 1960, about 18 years before she passed away. She actually has over about 30 statues across the United States in different areas. So she was very successful in her life as a sculptress. And anyway, just thought I would bring her to you. Let's see. So in 1664, this is, we're still in that decade of religious torture if you weren't a Puritan, if you were a Quaker. And in 1664, a woman named Margaret Fell was arrested for failing to take an oath to the king and for allowing Quaker meetings to be held in her home. She was imprisoned for more than 4 years, and while in prison, and this is notable, Margaret wrote, I'm reading from my, not sure what page I'm on, I'm in the Kindle copy. But while in prison, Margaret wrote the pamphlet called Women Speaking Justified, Proved, and Allowed of by the Scriptures. At the time, it was against the law for women to speak in public, and that actually didn't change for a really, really long time. Late 1800s, sometime mid 1800s, something like that. And that was hard fought. A lot of women were arrested and beaten for trying to speak in public, which is ridiculous. This is some trivia for you. In 1667, Abiah Folger was born, and she is the mother of Benjamin Franklin. She was born in Nantucket, Massachusetts, and her mother, Mary Morell Folger, the grandmother of Benjamin Franklin, was born in England and came to the Americas by being an indentured servant. And that's how their family tree, that's how they got here to the New World. Indentured servants would agree to work for a period of usually like 7 years as a way to pay the cost of transportation to the colonies in the New World. And so they were from all walks of life and all different countries. That it was a way, if you were poor, that was a way to get over here. And so I thought that was interesting. So I wanted to include that in the book. Abiah's sister, Bathsheba Folger, was directly involved with the Salem witch trials. Now we're back to that. She is one of the women who was an accuser. She accused other women in the town of being witches. She was accusing some and throwing a shoe at an accused. This was in one of the newspapers. It's in the book. She reportedly accusing some and throwing a shoe at an accused person head during one of the trials. So she would go to the trial because she had accused this person who had been arrested and sit and watch the trials. And she apparently, it was reported anyway that she took off her shoe and threw it at one of them in the middle of the trial. Bathsheba claimed hysterical blindness during another trial as proof that an accused had put a spell on her and she was a witch. Abiah Folger went on to marry a candle maker, Josiah Franklin, and they ended up having 10 children, one of which was Benjamin Franklin. So he had 9 siblings. There is a monument, a statue to Abiah on Matticat Road at the location of what used to be the Folger Farm, which is now owned by the Nantucket Historical Society Association. So if you want to drive by that. Let's see. I'm going to skip some of it because we want to leave some things to curiosity. Oh, this was an interesting woman. Maria Sibylla Marian. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But she is the first woman to publish a book of insect illustrations. And in fact, hers was the first book from anyone, even no man or woman, either one. She published the very first book of insect illustrations in 1675. She was born in 1647 in Germany. She became a pioneering woman in the world of entomology, insects. She was not only known for her beautifully detailed illustration of insects and plants. Now, she made a big impact on the world and continues to today. And we really should know more about her, and some of you probably do. But for those of you who don't, she did beautifully detailed illustrations of insects and plants, but she was also recognized and respected for her work in identifying new species and the mysterious behavior of certain insects. That was really misunderstood before she did her research. She documented in great detail the process of metamorphosis at a time when many still believed that bugs merely came up out of the ground. And she watched and understood and documented the metamorphosis, a caterpillar to a butterfly, things like that. So she's a very interesting person if you want to read up more about her. Now, in 1677, a female Pamunkey Indian chief named Kakakuski, I probably not saying that right, known by many as the queen of the Pamunkey tribe. She had emerged before the House of Burgess in Jamestown, Virginia, asking for the release of some of her people in her tribe that had been taken captive during an attack by Nathaniel Bacon. Now, normally, if you're looking at history, you would not assume a woman would be sent to do negotiations, but in fact, she did. And often in the Native American tribes, especially at that time, women were the head of the tribe. There were many women who reigned and were queen, as they called them, over their tribes. So she's the one who went to the House of Burgess, which was the government court at the time, and tried to negotiate the release of these Native Americans that had been attacked and kidnapped by Nathaniel Bacon. And you can read on that. It's called, we learned about it in history class as Bacon's Rebellion. So it was in May of 1677. She was the first of the tribal leaders to sign the Treaty of Middle Plantation, sometimes called the Treaty of 1677. So women were involved, and that's why I wanted to do this. I don't think we realized how much women were really involved in government and leading and negotiating and government. And, we were definitely involved in having an impact and making a difference. So during her she reigned for 30 years as chief. She worked diligently to maintain peace and unity between the tribes and the colonists. So she was, even in the newspapers, you can see where when white men are talking about Indian tribes, Native American tribes, they describe them as violent. But if you really read it, I can't tell you how many times I've read an article and it would say, they're really violent when you attack them. Of course they are. If you attack somebody, they're going to respond in kind. And so maybe don't attack them. Anywho, she died in Virginia in 1686, and she was succeeded by another woman named Betty, who was her niece. And she reigned until her death in 1708. A statue is at the Virginia Women's Monument Memorial. So You want to check that out. She's someone very interesting. I'd like to read more about her. I haven't had the chance, but I would like to read more about her. So there's let's see, Alina Lucretia Coronaro Descopia, aka Helen Coronaro. She was the first woman to receive a PhD degree in 1678. This is over in Italy, but she's the first woman that's documented that we know about. She was born in Venice in 1646. She passed away in 1684 of tuberculosis. In 1999, a writer named Jane Smith, Guernsey, wrote a biography on Miss Coronara, and it's called Pride and Prodigy of Venice, if you want to learn more about her. There's a lot of really interesting, strong women who really plowed through the stereotypes and the norm. They were definitely the minority, but if not for them, right? So skipping ahead here a little bit. Okay, now this I found in the first woman and the first person. The first person happened to be a woman that was executed during the Salem witch trials. And her name was Bridget Bishop, and she was killed on June 10th, 1692. That's a familiar date. And she was a 60-year-old mother of 3. Let's just picture that. 5 more women were executed 9 days later. Sarah Good, I got this from the newspapers. I just found that interesting. Sarah Good, age 39. Rebecca Nurse, age 71. Suzanne Martin, age 70. We lost our place. Elizabeth Howe, age 56, and Sarah Wilds, age 65. I don't know what we picture, when we think about the Salem witch trials. I don't know what kind of vision you have when you're reading about that. And how, like the age of these women. And I don't think that we even consider that these were older women with children and grandchildren and just part of the community and had been part of the community. It's not like, it's not like they were new people that nobody knew and they were being chastised or, but my book is jumping ahead on me. One of them, her husband, was also executed after being found guilty of witchcraft, which was unusual. It was normally women, but there were men. But instead of being hanged, he was pressed to death. If you want to look that up, he was pressed to death while Martha was hanged. Anne Pugh Dieter, who was in her 70s, was killed. Mary Parker, 55, Alice Parker, Willamette Red, and Margaret Scott, all in their 70s. These were old grandmas. I can't just, some women died in prison waiting for trial or for their execution to be carried out, like Anne Foster. Lives ruined. That's a little bit of trivia. On December 28th, 1694, Queen Mary II succumbed to smallpox at the age of 32. Maybe get vaccinated. She didn't have that luxury back then, but we do now. Okay. Now, I love this. Mary Bradbury, which I had heard of her before, connected to the Salem witch trials. In 1700, in December, she successfully escaped from prison. She had been put in prison because she was accused of being a witch, and she's waiting for a trial. She actually escaped from prison. after being accused and convicted of being a witch in 1692. She escaped. She was never caught again. She hid out until her death in 17 at the age of 85 in what is now Massachusetts. She survived long enough in hiding for the hysteria to be discredited. I thought this was interesting. Ray Bradbury is said to be the seventh great grandson of Mary Bradbury, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, a fourth great grandson. So, all related. I found this piece about Mary Bradbury in a New York Times article in 1879. And it's, I just love reading old newspapers. That's why I put this book together. I thought I would take out all the men and see what we have about women. Among the persons thus charged with witchcraft was Mary Bradbury, a woman of 75 years old, the wife of one of the most prominent and honorable citizens of the town of Salisbury. She was a woman of exceptionally high standing in Christian life and character. She and her husband had been residents of Salisbury for over 50 years and were lifelong friends of Robert Pike. Their son, Wyman Bradbury, had married Sarah Pike, eldest daughter of Robert, 30 years before. The families were thus associated by ties of the most intimate character. On the arrest of Mary Bradbury, Robert Pike naturally entered into the case with all the zeal and energy of his nature. If anything was wanting beyond the native impulses of his character to induce him to embark in opposition to the fanatical storm then raging, we have it in this family connection. He was, however, unable to gain Mary Bradbury's acquittal. She was convicted along with 5 others, but escaped. She won that round, didn't she? But it never should have happened. Anyway, that was the newspaper article I included in the book. So I'm gonna close up for this episode, but on the next episode, we're gonna start in 1701, and we're gonna start with an order issued by the Queen of England regulating what women could wear and could not wear, and how the women responded to that. So I hope you tune in. If you have questions, put them in the comments below. If you have any, comments about anything, and if you want to read the book, the link is below to the product page, and I will see you next time.